What's up, listeners and supporters of the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast? We need some help from you, and it won't take up too much of your time. As we grow, we always want to hear your feedback, so take a minute or two to fill out a short anonymous survey. The survey link is right in the episode notes for this podcast. It's easy and takes less than 5 minutes. As always, we thank you for your continued support. Ain't Hard to Tell podcast episode 50. We're at the big 50. That's what people say when they turn 50. So I guess I'll say that.
Not looking forward to that.
You're not looking forward to that? You got a ways to go, man. You got 25 years.
God willing.
Shut up. Dexter Henry, Bryan Fonseca here for episode 50. We have a guest, special guest. Glad to have him on the podcast. Good friend, great journalist, Kevin Armstrong. He's a journalist, and he's also the executive producer of a new documentary that's coming out called My Perfect Life that centers on the late Aaron Hernandez. We're going to talk to him about all of that. Kevin, what's up, man?
Good to be here, guys.
Yes,
Two
man.
familiar faces from the New York City sports scene over here.
Yeah,
yes.
I had told Kevin over the summer we're going to make this happen, and then with the documentary coming out, the timing is just very, very ideal.
Yeah, which I had no idea about you even working on it till a couple weeks ago when he told me, and I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we kept it under wraps for a little bit. We just kind of dug in, and it's an exciting time now to kind of see the work, put on a big screen like that and everything. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited. The premiere's coming up on the 14th and 15th of November this month, so we're definitely going to check that out. We're going to get into Kevin a little bit, and we're going to get into his documentary. Kevin, first, we always like to do this. We have any journalist or anybody on here, we like to ask them how they got into the game. So for you wrote for quite a bit of time at the Daily News, covering a wide variety of things, especially in the world of sports. How'd you get into the game?
Yeah, so, always a sports fan. Grew up reading the Daily News, the Times, Rockland Journal News. I'm from Nanuet, New York, up by the Tappan Zee Bridge there. So,
Yep.
Always into sports as a kid, baseball, basketball, ran track in high school, got to college, Boston College, and, really loved sports and started to really get into reading and writing and history as a major. And, I had a roommate who told me, he said, you should, I've been working with the school paper, The Heights. Why don't you come out and, just kind of, he just thought I'd like it.
Yeah.
And, it turned out that I loved it. And I started doing like women's lacrosse games, field hockey, anything that I could, get involved with. And then, took it from there, worked at the Boston Globe for a few years in college as like a copy boy, kind of answering the phones, and you'd have all kinds of Boston characters calling you, and pretty much degenerate gamblers like looking for late scores. And they'd love the famous game when the Yankees went up 3-0.
I remember that day very well. I was in college. Remember that day.
So the next day, I opened the Boston Globe sports department. I went in, I turned the phones on. Literally, this is when the Globe sports department phone number was still in the paper. It's kind of like 03, 04 era, and so people are still not just going to the internet to get their scores. So a guy calls, right at like 9 a.m. when I open the phone lines, and he goes,
He was waiting.
He was waiting.
Damn.
He was, just so set for what he wanted to say, and he goes, "Hey," he goes, 19-8. And I said, I know what you're saying, sir, but I don't understand the context. And he goes, 19-8, we got you. And I said,
we got you.
Not for nothing, sir, but, grew up, in New York, lifelong Yankee fan. My dad grew up across the street from Yankee Stadium. You're not, riling me. He goes, oh, hey, any Sox fans in yet? And so he immediately pivoted. He wanted Shaughnessy. He wanted Bob Wright, whoever he could get to, kind of
Sports
thing.
fans are so weird.
And that was my world. Like, I loved it. I was a sports fan enough to know, everything that was going on in Boston, but, got kind of a true education in the newspaper business. The Globe was doing the spotlight stuff on the church scandal and everything, so learned a ton.
Now, this was you said you were there because that's 2004.
Correct.
So you were in Boston College. We were in college, I guess, about the same time.
Yeah.
You were there from what, 01 to what?
02 to 06.
02 to 06. So you were a year after me. So okay, so we saw some of. So you still remember when both of our teams, our colleges, were in the Big East, and actually used to have some battles. It's Jared Dudley years I was telling you about.
We actually talked about that right before you got here too.
Boston College. We used to have some really good games when you guys came down.
Oh, absolutely.
I never got to go up to you guys for a game at all the schools. I did a lot of coverage, but I never got to go up there. But it sure would have been nice.
Kevin had asked me, how's Jared Dudley doing? Because now he's with the Nets, and then I was like, he's starting now.
Yeah.
Look, Jared Dudley is
I couldn't stand it. I'll tell Jared Dudley this too if he comes up here. I couldn't stand him in college. He used to annoy me. Oh.
He is the OG of.
But that's like a respect thing, not like
the short corner jump shot in Al Skinner's flex offense. I'll give Al Skinner a lot of credit. Not only did he, bring him in when Jared was pretty much an under the radar recruit. He was not a stud or anything. And I remember, I think it was the end of Jared's freshman year. They were in the tournament, I believe, out in Milwaukee is where we were. And Al said, he's 10 years in the NBA.
Yes, that was. It's funny. Did you go out to that? Did you go out to Milwaukee for that tournament?
I did. Yeah,
I was there too.
Is that right?
That was Pitt played Wisconsin in the second round. I remember that, and that's crazy. We were both there. I remember.
It was
cold. Do you remember how cold it was that weekend?
It was terrifyingly
cold.
Man. It was don't go back to Milwaukee cold.
Yes. And have you been back to Milwaukee since?
Once.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Briefly.
No, it was cold that weekend. That's crazy. We were both there at the same time.
I remember that Wisconsin game because, the Wisconsin people were going crazy. Yep. And, the whole town was red and everything.
Devin Harris was on their team.
Devin Harris.
They beat UPenn, and then they lost to, I forget who they. BC never made it out of the second round when I was covering them. My senior year, they finally made it to the Sweet 16. That was Dudley, Sean Williams. Net fans can also
remember
know about that tenure. And
yikes,
BC folks could have.
He had potential.
BC folks could have predicted a few things about Sean's demise there. But those were fun years. Craig Smith, Lewis Hinnon.
Yep.
It was a fun BC team. And, one year they started either 20 or 21-0.
Yeah.
Literally to the seat. BC was killing people. And Dudley, I remember clearly, I think they beat Villanova, and he had 30-something, and I can vividly remember him taking his headband out and throwing it into the stand. I forget if it was technical or something like that he had done and everything. But Jared Dudley is just a master of playing at his pace. Nobody's going to knock him off. They're not going to speed him up. They're not going to slow him down. There's the Dudley pace, and there's everyone else's pace. And I actually have a funny story. They played out at the Wooden Classic at one point out in L.A., and Dudley sees me in the airport, and, he knew that I was, the newspaper columnist for the school paper and everything, and my friends and I still laugh about this. He comes up to me, and he goes, "How long has your face been in that box?"
What?
And he's talking about the headshot.
The headshot that's in next to your column. Right.
So he sees the school paper. Yeah. He sees it. And, it wasn't hey, I love your writing. I hate your writing.
How long has your face been in that box?
I like this. He goes, "How long has your face been in that box?" And I still have buddies who played with Jared and everything, and they'll joke with me. They'll come up, just randomly, be like, that box.
I'm sorry, we kind of derailed from your time at the Globe and all that you were able to learn there.
I have a question, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now that you bring that up, did you ever meet Bob Ryan?
Oh, yeah, I love Bob Ryan and Dan Shaughnessy, two guys who were, so, high up there in our industry.
Yeah.
Were great to me. Bob Ryan had a great line about Al Skinner at one point. Al is a great guy. He's not going to give you everything in terms of, talking about the team or whatnot, but he was particularly, closed, tight-lipped on something. And I remember walking back to the locker room at some point, and Bob Ryan just said, he goes, Al's saving it for the memoirs. He's not giving it out for free, after a St. John's game or something.
You're going to have to pay for this.
Right. He goes, at some point, and I always think of that, when people are like just, some people are just quiet by nature, and that's what Al is. Al's not a schmoozer or anything like that. So I think things like that, and Shaughnessy as well.
Great guy.
Great guy. Gives Boston what it needs to hear. Like he is not a homer by any extent. He gives it to him straight, and maybe I appreciate it because I was an out-of-towner who went to Boston and has seen both sides of it. But Dan, to this day is a guy who's championed me, along my career and really been there. I would leave my columns from the Heights, from the school paper, on their desks, and this speaks to both of them. Bob would give me feedback in person, like when he'd see me in the office, and Dan would call me. I'd be back on campus, and he'd say, "Hey, this was great. This would get you fired. Like, this is, where you need to improve." But it was feedback from guys who were actually doing it at a high level.
Having worked with Dan, because when I worked for a previous company and I used to do video for the Boston Globe, I would work with Dan and do videos for them sometimes for their website.
God,
and
you worked everywhere.
Yeah, I've done sometimes I think about it, I've done a lot. I got to work with people like Dan. So Dan, great guy. He would give. It doesn't surprise me about that story that he would give feedback like that. How important was that for you as a young journalist? Because when you know how that is, to be able to have somebody you look up to and say, "Hey, this is where you're going right. This is where you're going wrong." How important was that for you?
That's huge. I mean, it was one thing to be published, in your school paper, let alone freelancing for other places, and you're going through the reps and you're getting your bylines and whatnot. But to somebody, the day-to-day operations of the newspapers don't necessarily allow for much feedback, especially for the young guys. You're kind of filling a role. You're doing high school stuff. You're kind of helping them put out the paper and everything. But when you have people like that who have accomplished and are authors, and then you get some feedback, it's like, all right, like I'm on the path at that point, and you understand that you're not just writing in a vacuum. And, it's nice to hear from friends and family members, people who are, just kind of, reading it because you're writing it. And then there's people like that who, really, give you when you get encouragement from that, you're like, all right, I don't want to let them down.
Yeah.
You want to impress the next person and be like, oh, well, Shaughnessy and Ryan and Joe Sullivan was the editor and Bob Holmes was the high school editor. Like those were the people who opened the door for me. And, Shaughnessy literally, like I sent him an email with my BC stuff. He called me because I left my home phone number, and he, just didn't have to do that.
No, he did it.
So whenever somebody, is in a similar situation, I'm more than willing to,
well,
discuss.
That's always the important thing. And I always say that when you've had the people who've helped you, you have to be able to give back as well, too. And I always try to give back to younger people in the industry and help them if they reach out. I always will try to answer an email. Even if I can't help, I say I can. But if I can, you always try to. That's a good thing. Glad to hear. So tell us, all right, learned a lot at the Globe.
Yeah.
Then what'd you do next? What happened?
Graduated May of 2006.
And everything got real and you had to pay bills.
Everything got real. Then you go, I went to the New York Post for 3 months. I worked there as kind of like a kind of jack of all trades. If they needed some reporting, putting together the horse racing pages, things like that. So, that was an education as well, just coming into the New York market. And
you were there what year? Because we I think overlapped our times there.
Yeah. So May 06 through August 06. So it was kind of like it was a full-time job, but one of my connections who I had made while at the Globe was a guy, B.J. Schechter, who happened to be a high-up editor at Sports Illustrated. And they were starting a high school section at that point at Sports Illustrated. And he hired me to be a fact checker / reporter for that high school section, essentially. And so I did that for a little over 3 years, but so to about November 09. And then there were layoffs at SI, which in the recent years have, just continued to whittle away.
We'll get to that.
At a great magazine. And, that was another education. Then you're, working at a national magazine, you're seeing how facts are checked, how stories are, turned into print and everything. And, just working with guys like John Wertheim and Scott Price and Tim Layden, you really got to see how they put together their stories from, assignment to publication. And that was also huge. Like, Shaughnessy had told me, he's like, oh, you're doing great with newspapers, but you really have kind of like a magazine style. And he was the first person to ever tell me that. And I took that, and then I just wanted to develop that further. I wanted to report deeper, develop a narrative arc. And
do you feel like that was always in you, that you had the taste or desire for, I guess, some more long-form journalism than necessarily maybe the short form that you'll get structurally from doing a paper, a game recap, that kind of thing? Was that always there in you, and you just felt like that kind of brought it out?
Yeah, I guess it was. Even with the school paper, I had done some longer things, and, I think that wave was starting at that point where the industry was kind of going, I would say that, from when I started in 2004 to now, one of the big shifts is from a lot of young journalists wanting to be the big city columnist, say a Ryan or a Lupica, Plaschke kind of thing, to a number of people who may have gone down that path now becoming interested in deeper feature writing and whatnot.
Yes.
And I think that became attractive to a lot of journalists, and I was one of them. And, that was something that I did not want to be what was developing in terms of like the hot take artist and kind of a lower form of
no disrespect to those people, but good
of the column writing. And I just want, if it's going to be my byline and my name, I want something of substance.
Yeah, understood.
That.
Yeah,
and that's when I got into really going into the recruiting, high school recruiting and college basketball. And, making sure you're in the gyms and in the neighborhoods that you need to be, and just understanding the entire landscape of what's out there. And I think that was, the perfect education. There's a lot of, as we've learned with the federal trial, that, just handed down 7 counts of guilty verdicts in the last few weeks here. I saw a lot of that firsthand, and I couldn't tell you exactly what the wiretaps were picking up and whatnot, but you just saw the corruption, and you saw sports from the grassroots level, and I think that's something that everybody should learn along the way.
Bryan sounds like he wants to get into this because he knows how messy it is. And Kevin, you and I know we were both on that scene around that same time, and I've told you things I've seen and heard, so I'm not surprised at it.
Yeah, we just talked about that like a couple episodes ago or so. We were just talking about like the messiness of the grassroots level, but now that's not only is it not a surprise, it's not even something that's publicized now, because you're for example talking about this generation of where writers came up in that way, and now it's just different, where we've talked about this a lot, where there's not even the outlet to, hey, you start covering high school sports, you work your way up to college, then maybe you get minor league something or whatever. Like now it's way different than it was before, even 10 or so years ago.
And I think that's a huge shame. I mean, look, the New York Daily News when I was growing up would have like 10 pages of high school coverage on a Sunday. Every game, Rice, Christ the King, or
I remember reading those.
Lincoln Grady. You would read all about that, and there'd be a recruiting sidebar, and there'd be scores of teams that are below the radar, not even but it was serving the community. You were allowing people to know what was going on at their alma mater, or a school that they might be sending their kid to, and everything. And so I covered, even though I was at SI.com, I covered the New York area pretty thoroughly. So I saw Kemba Walker and Rice, beat Derrick Rose at the Garden, and saw those Gaucho teams, and Kemba went on to be an NBA All-Star, won the title at UConn. Book Richardson, who was his Gauchos coach, was one of the guys charged in the federal indictment and everything. So I remember the day that the indictment came down, my editor called me, and, I was actually up at Knicks that day at their training facility, and he said, this just came down. Can you help? And I said, sure. I know, Book Richardson. I know who these people are that are being charged. And I told them, I said, give me the basketball season to report this out, but I can take you in those gyms. I can take you into the corners where some of those deals are being struck. I can explain who the decision makers are, who the sneaker operators are, and everything. And it's one of the pieces that I was proudest of in my time at Daily News. It was called Through the Looking Glass, and really laid out from Lamar Odom and being the number one pick, number one prospect in '96, and he's telling me his value was $200,000, and he's telling me the guys, and he's going into the New York City Basketball Hall of Fame induction dinner, which I attended, and Gary Charles, his old AAU coach, is there, and Greg Shoes Vatrone, his recruiter from UNLV, was there, and everybody thinks that when these NCAA allegations come down and everything, everybody separates. But here was Odom getting the highest mark for a New York City basketball player, and the guys who were around it back then were still around back now, and even though he went on to make his $100 million, and obviously he's had issues off the court as well. But I always just think that panoramic perspective is important for readers. And I think that's what's sorely missing in local newspapers, let alone national publications, is what you'll see, those relationships that were developed at the high school reporting level. Frank Isola covered Stephon Marbury, back in Brooklyn, and he has a great story of, I think, dropping Stephon back, at his place in Coney Island, and Stephon telling him, if you see a red light, just keep on going, don't stop, it's a rough neighborhood and stuff like that. But those are the kind of relationships, I see Kemba now, and Kemba's an NBA All-Star, and, he'll still have, hey, Kevin, he'll see me.
Right, or I see Lance Stevenson now, and we've had good relationships and things because I covered him, and those things matter. Or Isaiah Whitehead and things like that matter. And I think you bring up a good point. We've lost that in here in New York City. I'm sure in other cities too. So you go to Chicago, other places, but that sense of journalism where you're building these relationships with these players as they come up in whatever the sport is, and opportunities for younger journalists that we had. That now Bryan doesn't necessarily have that opportunity. And do you think there's an impact on someone like Bryan? Like, is there something being lost for him and not being able to get that opportunity?
Yeah, I just think you have to be able to make those mistakes that any journalist is going to make at the high school level before you jump on to the NBA coverage or, college. I think it's the same route where guys would go down smaller towns or cities, and you'd be at a smaller newspaper, and you would work your way up to a St. Petersburg Times, and then you make a jump to a Boston Globe or a kind of a national paper in the old days, and that path isn't there right now, and that just that level of accountability that copy editors will build in you, and that you'll have the readers, you learn to build that trust with readers. They see your byline, they know what they're getting. It's not some foofery or, just some, uninformed opinion.
Right.
You made the calls, you went through the effort to report and everything. Now, I'm not saying that, guys like Bryan aren't doing that, but it's just that that path is broken at the moment.
Agreed.
To really make that jump and make that network and everything. So I think it's something that the industry really needs to reflect on. And New York City has lost a lot of local reporting, and the government reporting and politics, that's most important. But there's a reason that a lot of corruption can build in sports as well.
Yeah.
Especially with all the money. Like people laugh and they say, "Oh, sports, these are billion-dollar industries." People are pouring their money into
some
them.
local reporters are not getting enough of, by the way.
You were touching upon something with the finances and how corruption, even you see it on a political level, and still how it comes into sports. The piece you wrote for the Daily News, you were talking about the Through the Looking Glass piece, which was fantastic. What I've been interested with these indictments that have recently come down, it's been shocking to me that it appears, at least through social media, people I speak to, it doesn't seem like the public cares that much. Maybe I'm tripping on this, but it seems like the public doesn't care that much about the fact that there's corruption going on in high school basketball. Now, we are both
or they're just numb to it because of who it is,
right?
Who's involved.
Maybe they're numb to it and who it's involved, and it doesn't really affect them, or they don't have to go in those communities.
Right.
Kevin, you and I worked and covered stories in these communities. A lot of lower-end communities, a lot of minority communities, mostly black communities, where a lot of these kids feel like they've got to take this money. I think you and I, covering this, can understand why they might feel like they have to take this money. I have never been against any of these kids taking this money. When we saw the stuff come out last year, whether it was DeAndre and all the stuff, there seemed to be some kind of uproar at first, and you kind of question why the FBI wants to even go down this road. Are you shocked that what I'm saying and that people don't really seem to care about this? Is this not a big deal anymore? Are people really coming to decide that maybe we should be paying these college athletes? Or what is it? Or is it people are numb to it? There's a lot of questions I have here.
Sure.
But what do you think about the public's reaction to this?
There is some fatigue, just from scandal after scandal, and the NCAA not necessarily doing all that much. Now, it got to the point at Louisville where there's strippers involved, and okay, the NCAA said we probably have to do something here.
That's interesting in itself. That was the point for them where they're like, now we got to do something.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, you could be like, oh, they're just strippers.
This is the 20th anniversary of He Got Game this summer.
Wow.
Oh.
Okay.
That makes me feel old.
So
I love that movie.
And He Got Game.
You want me to tell you how old I was when that came out?
No, we don't.
All right, fine.
He Got Game was, I talked with Spike about it. I did a piece on the 20th anniversary, and he said, NCAA should have called me. He goes, watch He Got Game. Everything's in there.
That's true.
The assistant coaches who, Jesus is shown to. The corruption, the governor is paying the father to come down. And,
the two white girls in the dorm.
There's a lot of, it's not a direct story, but clearly it's a combination of a number of narratives that have taken place over the years.
Yeah.
So for the NCAA to say, we're shocked is...
Please.
The gall of them.
One thing I will say in terms of how this case could have and should have woken people up, they were going into the same federal courthouse every day that Michael Cohen is going into in the Trump case, that Madoff went into. Any number of historic cases, from the mafia to, New York corruption on Wall Street kind of stuff. Now, all three of the co-defendants in that trial, Jim Gatto, Merle Code, and Christian Dawkins, committed federal offenses. There's no doubt about that. From the day that the charges were announced, if you read the wiretaps and everything, and they covered up what they were doing. Do the kids need to be getting paid? Absolutely.
Yep.
There needs to be more of an even distribution of the wealth that the NCAA is developing.
Yeah. Agreed.
I have no argument with that. I will say that the number of opportunists and operators who benefit off of this in the sneaker industry, let alone the schools, need to be held accountable. And
I agree with that too.
When people told me during the trial, they're like, oh, they don't have that. I was like, look, they've got the checks. They've got, Merle Code working for Adidas, sending money down to South Carolina, rerouting it. He has his buddy, either writing checks or going. His buddy had to go to two separate banks.
Saw that.
to get enough money because there wasn't enough in a bank.
Right. Like that's there wasn't enough in one bank.
To me, that's if you do True Detective this case, that's the opening scene. Is you have the guy getting the email or the text.
This should
message,
be season 4 True Detective. This should be.
And
all
he
about
walks
this.
into the bank and they say, "Oh, sir, we can give you 50. But to get your next 20,000, you got to go down the block to the Bank of America or whatever it is." So, look, TJ Gassnola, those guys, I've seen them.
Yeah,
I know what they are. Could I have told you? I've written about these guys. I've written, he is the bag man. He is the guy who, and the thing to me, this is what just overall is wrong with the system. It's the chosen few. It's Kansas. It's Duke. Nike and Adidas are going to help these schools be prominent because they need consistency. If there's 350 schools that play Division I basketball, they need to know that Nike and UNC are going to be there each year in the tournament on CBS and broadcast. They're not worried about, the guys in the MEAC or, the Sun Conference and everything. While it's a nice narrative and those teams break through and they get their 2 weeks or
They're
whatever.
not the ones that make them the money.
They're not the chosen ones.
Right.
So for Bill Self, the night before he's going into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, having dinner with Jim Gatto and TJ Gassnola and their fiancés or wives or whatever, just stop. It's a farce if anybody believes that, hey, it's just helping the kids get there and this is the stayover, this is the price of admission for playing at that level. It's all a fraud in that sense.
Yeah.
And you're not allowing honest coaches at the lower levels, at the smaller schools, actually compete in that way. So there needs to be deeper investigations. And, they have 10 guys or whatever it is at this point, 8 guys, I think. Chuck Person and Book Richardson, and everybody's going to have their day in court. But the federal government showed in the first case that they have it.
All right, let's get back a little bit to your career. You then eventually got to the Daily News. It was after SI, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Correct. Yeah, after SI.
I think we talked a little bit about this on this podcast, like after all that went down.
Yeah, and then obviously you were there for how long were you at the Daily News?
About 8.5 years.
8.5 years.
8.5.
And I will preface this by saying, beside Kevin, I've watched a lot of friends who work there, and I used to freelance there myself, doing video. So
I tried no avail.
A lot of people have lost jobs with the layoffs that happened earlier this summer. You were one of them. Where I'd like to focus this on is, what was that like for you? Because I think we talk a lot about people's careers, and they go through this, and you go through this arc, and you've learned this, you went from here to here to here, but then you have a point in your life where it's like, oh, you're not working here anymore. What was that like for you? Finding it out and saying, hey, I've got to bounce back, because you have so much going on, but obviously I think anytime you lose a job, it's not easy, and you have to find a way to bounce back. What was that like for you, Kevin?
Sure. So, the Daily News was great to me. I started in April 2010. I covered everything from the Olympics to the NBA playoffs, Super Bowls, Final Fours, PGA Championship, American Pharaoh, at Belmont. So got exactly what I wanted from my experience with the Daily News. Had a tremendous relationship with my editor, Terry Thompson, the one who brought me in, Bill Price, Eric Barrow. They let me grow. They let me take on stories that a lot of other places may have, given to more experienced people. But I had a wide interest in sports, whether it was basketball, football, they could send me to anywhere and, I'll do it.
Yeah.
As long as it's, interesting and I get to file a story and, they didn't just have me on the games, like I signed on essentially doing jet stuff during the Rex Ryan tenure, which was great also, just to see that circus. And
it was a circus, all right.
It was success at first, and
it was not.
I was there for the good stuff, and was lucky enough to not have to do the daily stuff, during the Tebow, and, like kind of the 12.
Were you at that? Were you at the Tebow press conference?
I was at the initial one. Yeah.
Can you explain to people? Because I don't want people to just say it. I've explained how ridiculous was that?
They set it up in the indoor practice field. And the number of seats, I can still remember the stage.
I remember,
and the number of chairs.
How early did you get there that day?
Got there pretty early. I mean,
I was there at 8 that morning.
I mean, I remember when he flew in. He was at the private, airport that's right across essentially
Florham Park, right there.
Right,
yes.
right in town, Christ. And that's what Woody Johnson loved. It was the attention, the circus, the people writing about it and everything. And, Mark Sanchez had reached, 2 AFC title games already at that point?
The defense brought Mark Sanchez to 2 AFC title games.
Well, I think what I'm even saying with Kevin is, and I've covered 2 Super Bowls, and I've done media days at 2 Super Bowls, and that might be the next craziest thing I've done
for one single person. You're like, at least the other events are like multiple.
Am I? Do you feel like I'm reaching on that? I don't feel like I'm reaching on that.
I mean, it was Tebow mania.
It was crazy.
Current Mets minor leaguer, by the way. I'm surprised he hasn't mentioned this to this point. Sorry,
we're not talking about that.
Tim carried himself well. I don't have any problems with Tebow. It's
no,
the
none
mania
whatsoever.
around.
It was
him.
the mania. It was crazy.
I actually covered his playoff game. Out in Denver
against Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
I remember going to church that morning, and the priest ended the church, ended the mass with, "May we have another Tebow miracle." And I remember,
look at Dexter's face.
This was my first. You'd heard it all year.
Yes.
That it was going on in Denver, and. I remember then watching, the final play where he connects with Demaryius Thomas.
Did you add this
short pass?
Did you put this in your story?
Oh, absolutely. I led with it.
It had to be the lead.
I called Terry Thompson. I was like, "Look, I know we don't usually, bring church into game stories, playoff game stories." I was like, "But this is." I
saw this.
What was his response when you told him that?
Oh, he was funny. I didn't tell him, that had happened.
I'm leading with Jesus.
But, you knew that he was going to mention Jesus at some point in the press conference. He thanks Jesus. He has his very, regimented, speeches and addresses and everything.
Regimented speeches.
He, I remember just being like, what a night, in terms of, I remember that offseason too, like Demaryius Thomas, by the time they were ready to move on from Tebow or shipped or whatever the timing was, that he'd been like, Tim wasn't that good. I was like, you just had like a definitive moment of your career, with the guy.
You're like,
well, he made that moment though. I mean,
he
short
did.
pass.
I'm not saying Demaryius Thomas is wrong, but he wasn't.
Tebow was, hey, he got him that win, and I covered the next week. They got blown out, as everybody does in New England at that time of year. And I remember people were wearing like devil costumes, and it wasn't Halloween.
Oh, New England!
This was like the way to combat Timmy at that time.
Oh man!
Just going back to the Daily News real quick.
Yeah, sorry, jumped off the Tebow thing. Just had me. I had to react to that.
Tim has derailed a few things.
Yes.
Yeah. So was that unexpected? Because not too long before that, I think, was when Tronk purchased it. So I guess what was the sort of general feeling when that happened, and then when the layoffs were going down? Like, how did that sort of, I guess, happen?
Yeah, Tronk, if I remember, I think it was September, 17.
Yeah,
they purchased the newspaper.
Was it really for $1, like reported?
Yes and no. It's a number of they assume a bunch of, to my understanding, a bunch of debt and pensions and stuff like that. It's clearly a bigger number that they're investing, but whatever the official statement might be $1 technically in those terms. They bought the paper in September. Not too much changed immediately. We had already gone through severe layoffs. I guess that would have been
Was that 2 years before?
2015,
Yeah.
I want to say. And around this,
It was 2015 because I remember because we had met at St. Francis, and you had told me that after, like, this was during my senior year.
Correct.
Yeah.
I was doing a story on the gyms of Brooklyn and courts all over the place and everything.
And Kelsey Minato from Army.
Yep.
I remember that.
Absolutely. Who was one of my favorite
players.
stories.
Yeah.
Scored over 50 in a game.
Yep.
West Point cadet. Still an inspiration for a lot of people. She talk about breaking, the glass ceiling and whatnot. She really went a lot farther than anybody expected.
Yeah.
But those were the types of stories that I was allowed to do, and profiles, and I pretty much spent a season going up to West Point, game after game, and just kind of taking in what she was doing. Even covered her on the road. Aaron Hernandez's trial was going on in Massachusetts, and I was up there for like weeks at a time, and West Point was playing Holy Cross. So I just drove to Worcester one night and, saw her score another 30-something. And the opposing coach is throwing the whole playbook at her, and she's still, getting buckets like that.
She was a beast.
She was.
But we had, 15, the Daily News had a bunch of cutbacks. Wayne Coffey, Terry Thompson, Philip Bondi, just true legends and professionals in terms of what they contributed to the New York Daily News. And when that happened, a lot of people were, took notice, both inside and outside the newsroom.
And this was when, more or less?
That was September or October.
This is
15.
still okay. This is still.
Yep.
So that was the first wave,
Okay.
and in a way, I benefited from the fact that people who would have been like Wayne and other writers who may have been assigned things that I was working on. I got a lot more opportunities to continue to grow, and Wayne, which was a bittersweet situation. Wayne is somebody who read my work and would give me feedback. Much like Shaughnessy at the Globe, and Terry Thompson was somebody who literally, I used to joke it was like she had a slingshot and she would just put me in it, and something would happen. Whether it was a murder or a plane crash or high profile national news, and she would trust me and say, we think Kevin will come back with the story, and I'd bring back 2,000, 4,000 word stories for her and everything. And it was her trust that really allowed me to flourish at the Daily News. But then July came, and that was I was part of the thing that you don't take it personally because you're walking out the door with literally 40 to 50 coworkers, and I was in the office on the day that it happened. They came in and they just announced it, and it's one of those situations where you're like, okay, all right, you know what your situation is with the news, and now it's a matter of finding something else, and whether it's freelance or full time. And I just went to work right away. Even before I left the building, I was getting phone calls from people who I know and, telling me I need to contact this person or that person. And, I'd been through a layoff with Sports Illustrated before and had started freelancing with the New York Times immediately after. So, I just approached it the same way. I didn't care, how long the severance was or, whatever our situation was with the news. I just went to work for, a number of outlets, and, the Los Angeles Times, I did something for them. The federal trial with the basketball corruption, I did some work with the Washington Post.
Saw that. Yeah.
I've been doing the New York Times.
Metro.
I've done a few things
stuff.
for them. Metro with the New York City Marathon, and Adrian Peterson running all over the Giants last week.
Saw that one.
So, what I've always taken pride in is having a variety of interests and, curiosity that can take me into a lot of corners. And I think that's something that can benefit me, in this landscape. Obviously, it's a fragmented landscape in terms of a lot of changes going on in a lot of different places.
Yeah.
But, I think it's about the work that you've done and, what you can present to people, And I think it's, one of those experiences that you don't want to go through.
Yeah.
But when it comes, you better be ready and you better embrace it.
Back Backpack Broadcasting continues to bring you the best original sports content, but now you can get more of the content you love. For as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus content, including behind-the-scenes footage and interviews from the Sports Walk, Sideline Stories, or the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast. All this exclusive content comes via Patreon. There are tiered levels of patronage, and each Backpack Broadcasting patron receives exclusive perks. Your support helps Backpack Broadcasting create more of the original content that you love. Visit Backpack Broadcasting's Patreon page and become a patron today. Ain't Hard to Tell podcast, episode 50. Kevin Armstrong, great journalist and the executive producer of My Perfect Life documentary on the late Aaron Hernandez. We will touch on that in a minute, but as we always do, we've got to pick a number of an athlete for this episode. Kevin understands how this works.
Yeah, we explained it.
Brian, as always, has done the research behind the numbers of everyone, even the most obscure numbers, and Kevin actually reminded us of somebody who should have been on the list that was not on the list. Brian, you can take it away with that.
All right, fine. So for number 50, by the way, speaking of obscure names, one of the episodes, because the numbers were terrible, we went with Kwame Brown. I'm just letting you know how obscure this could be. Yeah. And I was pushing for Kwame Brown because he wore like 34, 36, 37, 38, like all those numbers. So I was like, yo.
I think that's your rule. If you've worn more than like 4 numbers, you can't even like be a part of it.
But the number was so bad, whatever it was, so we were just like, whatever.
Yeah.
So it is what it is.
That's how low we got.
So 48, we went with Torrey Hunter, and 49, Tim Wakefield. So let's see how we follow this up.
Yeah.
49.
I think I know where I'm going, but okay.
50. So there's a lot. We got Mike Singletary.
Solid.
AJ Hawk. Remember him?
Yes.
Less solid.
Mike Vrabel.
Not
solid.
thrilled for me,
Not
but as a Jets fan. But yeah.
Okay, Justin Houston.
Who?
From the Chiefs. Pass rusher.
Yeah.
He's really good, but we're not picking him, I guess. Jamie Moyer. Sid Fernandez.
Sid.
Mookie Betts. I just want to see if you're.
I like Mookie Betts.
I just want to see if you're looking out for Mookie here.
Look out for my people? No. Okay.
You did that with Torrey Hunter.
But I actually like Torrey Hunter. I'm not like a fan of Mookie Betts.
You're not a fan of Mookie Betts?
I like Mookie Betts, but not in the Torrey Hunter level of fandom.
I bet you would love him if he was with the Mets.
I would. True.
Greg Anthony.
Nope.
Tyler Hansbrough.
Nope.
Eddie House.
I liked Eddie House.
I used to play basketball with high socks and a headband like him.
Oh, you sure people have to stick together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Short people with jump shots. So no Eddie House. Corey Maggette.
Oh, man, that man could get to the line.
Covered him a big 3 this past summer.
That's right.
Emeka Okafor.
Wow.
Told you this was a long list. Bryant Reeves is the one that I forgot.
That Kevin brought up.
Yeah.
We know Brian.
Yeah. Dug up a photo of him, and I forgot what he looked like, and yeah.
Big country did damage.
Was no surprise that he was from Arkansas when I saw him.
No surprise.
No offense. Zach Randolph.
Zebo.
That's it? No love for Zach Randolph?
I like Zach Randolph.
Zebo had a nice run.
Ralph Sampson. We're almost done. David Robinson, which is probably the favorite
the
here.
Admiral.
And my pick, not really my pick. Michael Sweetney.
I think it's the Admiral in a landslide.
Dexter hates me.
Yeah, I do. Kevin, you, as a writer, now have gotten into the documentary world.
Mm-hmm. But you were covering a lot of this person that we're about to mention.
We should say that Kevin had covered a lot of the Aaron Hernandez trial.
Yeah.
So you're well versed in that, informed on that, and everything. But you're now involved in a documentary. You have an executive producer title.
Right. Along with, who are your co-producers again?
Sure.
Yes.
Dan Wetzel.
Dan Wetzel.
National columnist for Yahoo.
Yes.
Great guy, great journalist. Gino McDermott is the director of the film. He works with Blackfin Productions. He's also CEO of that company. Christina Roberts is another, Christina Douglas, sorry. And Adam Tlaib is the editor, also a producer, and Sean DeClaire is another talented documentarian, both with the camera and producing. really helped us. Everybody had their part, kind of in getting this together. So
now you said, yeah,
Oh,
my bad. Now you said before about how you guys kept this under wraps for a while. So I guess when did this process sort of start putting this together? Because obviously, you and some of the other people have an extensive background in covering this bizarre Aaron Hernandez situation.
Sure.
And I find this fascinating that there's a documentary coming out on it. I think we both do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a ton of twists along the way, and there still continue to be, revelations and whatnot. It's that fresh, and so just speaking personally, I from the day he was a suspect in June of 2013, I was. It was one of those stories, like I told you, with Terry Thompson. I called her. I said, there's an NFL player accused of murder up in, or being suspected of murder up in Massachusetts.
That was already 5 years ago?
Yeah.
I think that's something that, we would want to explore. And she said, go, so I drove up and I spent 10 days, going around the Dorchester neighborhood where Odin Lloyd, the victim, was from. Foxborough, obviously, where the Patriots play, and Hernandez was in his third year, had just finished his third season with the Patriots, had already played in a Super Bowl, caught a touchdown pass from Tom Brady against the Giants, which they lost that game. But, Hernandez and Gronk, they were known as the Boston TE Party, just a legendary combination that would appear to be, just picking up momentum as Brady was continuing, the passing attack at that point. But Odin Lloyd's body was found in a undeveloped industrial park about less than a mile from Hernandez's McMansion in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. Hernandez had a young daughter. He had a fiance living with him, had signed a 5-year, $40 million contract. Literally all he had to do in the world was not kill somebody or commit a crime that would send him away for any amount of time. He would be living a pretty nice life. He was 23 at the time.
Yep.
Jesus Christ.
And, so it had a lot of elements there that, needed to be explained. And I had become kind of a person who was camped out at the intersection of sports and crime in terms of my reporting. From Plaxico Burress's prison release up in upstate New York. There had been a number of other stories, kind of tragedies that I had, followed a lot of the threads on and whatnot. And this is one that, I spent 10 days up there at first. Odin Lloyd was killed on June 17th. Mm-hmm. Aaron was eventually arrested on, I believe, June 26th, and from there, Odin Lloyd was dating the sister of Aaron Hernandez's fiance.
Yeah.
Right.
So, there was a closeness. There was no denying that Aaron Hernandez was linked to Odin Lloyd. It wasn't like there was just somebody found with rental car keys in his pocket. That,
right.
Hernandez was the person who rented the car. And so, the links were undeniable. And the police, were pretty tight-lipped at first. There wasn't too much revealed, but I made my way around to a lot of the neighborhoods and pretty much everybody who was involved. The CNN trucks and all those people were parked outside of Hernandez's house. And, you see the footage of Hernandez being walked out after all that time. I remember standing outside the house just in case there were more. One day the cops came and they did executed a search warrant.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a full, fleet of cars came in, and you have the TV trucks kind of choking the street, and the cops come in and they go about their business. They're taking out the brown evidence bags and everything. And I can vividly remember like the neighborhood kids playing like patty cake as, this scene is playing out. And it was just one of those bizarre, American stories of like, this high class neighborhood where, Teddy Bruschi lived right around the corner from Hernandez. And, this is where you go when you make it. This is where, nothing's supposed to follow you in. kind of thing. And Hernandez was clearly associating with a lot of doing a lot of drugs, a lot of marijuana, a lot of hanging out with guys who were dealing and into guns and some higher end crime stuff.
Were people in the neighborhood aware of this, at least from your going around it and doing?
I don't think so. Not at that time. And again, it's you're a well-to-do neighborhood. Everybody's got a nice house.
Everybody's kind of insulated from everybody else.
Exactly.
Right?
You've got your well-manicured lawns. You're not living on top of each other. So even if people are coming in and out of Hernandez, I don't think he was running around with guns or doing things on his front lawn. But a few things with the crime, when he committed the crime with Odin Lloyd, are the police were able to piece together all the surveillance tapes, from the block where Hernandez picked up Odin Lloyd. They have the car, and then they have, different stops. They've got Hernandez at a gas station, and he's, even dancing at one point, just kind of, whether he's high or drunk or just, feeling good that night. And, within minutes, he's pumping 6 bullets into Odin Lloyd and leaving him in an industrial park. And, what's going on with the mind? What's going on with, just his life at that point that leads him to do something like that? And that's something that we wanted to explore, with he ostensibly had everything and, is living that American dream. He's from Connecticut. He's doing well with the Patriots, kind of a local boy, a few hours away, but, it's not like he's a foreign import or anything like that.
Right.
And in some ways, the proximity to home probably cost him a lot. There was some context back there that, clearly maybe if he had been, a farther distance from, he wouldn't have been associating with. But it was just one of those things that I kept on going up there. I did the first 10 days, and then I did, a number of hearings and, just the evolving case and everything. And it took 2 years before the first trial, which lasted 10 weeks. And, there was everything from a bomb threat at the courthouse to, the prosecutors asking the judge because they had a bad prior relationship or situation to, literally filed for the judge to be taken off the case and everything. So it just kept on being all the, you go, when the trial came around, you'd walk into the courtroom and you'd have one sister on one side and the other sister on the other. And Cheyenne, the fiance, is reading fashion magazines, in the breaks and everything. And, to be there and to just absorb everything, was one of those experiences that, I think a lot of people don't have the opportunity to see a case fully evolve. But the Daily News kept on sending me back up there and, was able to, have relationships and speak with a lot of the people involved. And, that was, we felt we were covering a national story that a lot of people had an interest in. And eventually Blackfin, the production company, is who, Dan Wetzel and I, Dan had covered the trials for Yahoo, and we got in a room, and we thought there was a full story to be told in documentary format.
And so in terms of that, because you're going from, obviously you cover, both you guys, you and Dan, covering every day, writing it, and now Blackfin approaches you. You guys have a meeting, and this comes about. How did they talk to you about how involved you would be in this? Hey, are we just going to sit you down, do interviews where you can sort of recap stuff about what happened during certain things? You can be hands-on because you have executive producer credit, so I'm assuming you were hands-on in terms of the editing. This is how we're going to lay this out and do all this stuff. Was that told to you up front? Hey, you're going to be this involved in this project?
Yeah, we talked about a few different, paths that could be taken. And, the way I see it, just 2020 hindsight is, we were the institutional knowledge. Dan and I had covered the case and, had interacted with a lot of these people. Gino and Sean and Adam, had the cameras and, had the institutional knowledge in terms of how to make TV.
Yeah.
And, do that documentary length and everything. And, it was a learning process for both sides, for, both the journalist and the film crew and everything. But I think that the end product really represents a journalistic endeavor played out, on video. And, for the opportunity, we've been accepted into the Doc NYC Film Festival. That gives us a mark of credibility and a sign that, it was a tight crew that we kept, kind of 10 to 15 people. And for the idea of it playing out on a big screen and to, in a West Village, art house like that is, pretty
huge.
Incredible for us.
Just a quick question, Brian. Were there any, in terms of the documentary, so people see it at this, and this also premieres on the 14th. You can see it for people if you're in the New York area. It's at the Doc NYC Fest, as you mentioned, November 14th at the IFC Center, and there's also a second show, November 15th at the Sinopolis, Chelsea. So both people can see it there
at 9 at night, and then at 10 at night.
10 at night, the next day, at 9:15 and 10:15. In terms of voices in the story, obviously you're going to have a prominent voice. Dan will as well, too, being the journalist.
Right.
Was it just sound and stuff used from the courtroom? Are any of the people of the Hernandez family? Did you get any of those people in there? Lawyers, prosecutors? Like, are there other voices in this piece that's kind of diverse to get the story whole?
Definitely. So, Dan and I are both producers and on camera. We have a family member who I think is a strong voice.
Okay.
Kind of shedding light on Aaron as a family member and somebody who had a strong life long before anybody ever knew Aaron Hernandez, the New England Patriot or Florida Gator and whatnot. So I would say there's what was most interesting for me was characters who I had spoken to along the way and had either been quiet voices in stories that I had done or had been actually quoted, and people who were kind of part of a bigger piece or whatnot, to see them tell their story and speak their truths about Odin Lloyd and or Aaron was a pretty transitional moment for me. Like I'd always been a print guy. I don't do a ton of TV. I don't. I'm not somebody who is appearing on a number of shows or anything, but that to me was the perfect intersection of journalism and art, and being able to dig deep and find archival footage of a young Aaron that I might know exists, but it was a matter of bringing that to life and having high school footage of him and college footage, and also having the courtroom stuff. So, we taped the whole second trial and stuff like that. So we had, some of that stuff that may have been more difficult to obtain if we weren't on the scene kind of thing.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't he have, like, that you were talking about earlier, that sort of his past, right? Didn't he have that in Florida also? Wasn't that...
Yeah, there was some drug usage, and when he was going through the NFL draft process, because
I remember there was a picture that was controversial where he had the gun.
Correct.
This is
he's
when he
wearing
was
a red
student.
shirt. And
the baggy red shirt.
That picture.
A block or whatever it is. So I mean, Gainesville is really where you can start pulling some of the threads and seeing the formation of like maybe this guy's getting into a little more than the average college kid exploring, outside the bounds kind of thing of, where society or family or, what's acceptable and whatnot. And I think that, through our reporting and speaking to people, we have a pretty good representation of just, what may have added up inside him to eventually be a convicted killer and serving a life sentence. And again, the evolution of just the case, it was at first it was like, all right, it's a murder in the NFL, and it's murder at a good address in the sense that, the old tabloid theme and everything that goes back to Breslin and, Shap and people like that. But then it's also, okay, he goes through the first trial. He's convicted. A lot of people may have lost interest.
Yeah.
There was still a second trial.
The double murder trial.
Which was actually for a homicide that was committed before Owen and Lloyd.
Yep.
And so then it's like, people would ask me, they say, well, why do you need to cover it beyond the first? He's already going. He's never coming out. He lost his first trial. And there was the prosecutor for the Boston homicide for the second trial had brought up one of the scenes where Hernandez had allegedly committed the killing, and he was at a club. These guys either spilled his drink or bumped into him. There was some kind of dispute.
Yeah.
And, Hernandez is upset. He's following those guys that night. He sees them leave. He says to his buddy, Alexander Bradley, who was a drug dealer and, serving his own prison sentence and everything. He says, we need to go find those guys. And the prosecutor mentioned that allegedly Hernandez reached out with the gun, and it was a limited clip, whatever it was, a revolver. It was a revolver, so there were 6 or 8, however many bullets. Mm-hmm. And after it was completely emptied, so say, the clip, the revolver is empty at this point, he could still hear clicking.
He still heard the clicking.
Going beyond. So that's somebody who didn't just want to kill, but wanted to kill even more than he could.
Mm. And you're saying something like that speaks a lot to the mental state that Aaron Hernandez might have had at the time.
And I heard that, and I was like, of all the things that had happened so far, like the Odin Lloyd killing, and that was very detailed. The prosecutors laid that out and everything. And I remember telling my editor, I was like, you got to understand, like, what they're saying, with this guy. He emptied the revolver and was still going for more. Yeah. And he played a full NFL season after that.
After that alleged act, right.
And he was eventually acquitted in the second trial.
Yep.
And technically, he, in the eyes of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, he dies an innocent man because he did not have...
And I find that fascinating. And some people, it's very controversial. And obviously, you guys touch upon this in this piece, right? Because once he was acquitted for the double murder, even though he was convicted for the murder of Odin Lloyd because he committed suicide in jail, that he's an innocent man. And that
he did not have the opportunity to go through the appeal process.
Right. So,
how did that affect you guys also? Like, because you're already filming, you're already, undergoing this project, and then he commits suicide in April of last year.
No doubt. And, there was a lot of, like, ebbs and flows in public interest. And I don't think that public interest is necessarily what you gauge journalism by.
Agreed.
Again, it's, the click culture and everything. And, well, this happened, but let's move on to the next one. Mm-hmm. I had invested so much time as is that, I just wanted to continue following the threads and, never could have imagined that, we'd be, in a documentary form at the beginning. I do think at times, and there are photographs and things that, represent the 5 years that I, covered it from suspect to suicide. But there are even, more things that, if I had that documentary mindset, or if I was, recording things along the way, there could have been even more. But, you have that experience and you have that exposure to, like, this is what makes a documentary. And, we were able to find, enough video and speak to enough people that really brings that to life. But, the suicide happens and then it's, what else could be it? That is, we're going to donate his brain to BU to.
So that's where I wanted to go and link that to what you said before that the prosecutor said with him still holding the gun and clicking and wanting to dump more bullets past the bullets that are already gone. All right, so now you get to the point where you're talking about his brain gets donated to BU, right?
BU, right.
Boston University, and they find out that the doctors discover and say that he had the highest stage of CTE. And obviously there's all this talk that's been around NFL players and CTE, and doctors have really been looking at the brains of people like this. when you talk to other people around it, we actually have a doctor sitting here with us. My friend Howard's here for this recording. When you talk to people, medical professionals, about this, because some people are still not believing the CTE can actually impact people's brains. How much were they saying, this had an impact on these violent acts that we saw from this man, and what even tragically his suicide of him ending his life? Like, are they concluding that all of this had an impact on the man that we see Aaron Hernandez to be, or will be shown in your documentary?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, to reiterate, he lived till 27.
Right.
He was 23 when he stopped playing in the NFL. And, he commits suicide. That announcement comes within a day or so. That first week, Jose Baez, his defense attorney for the second trial, who was not his attorney for the first trial, announces that they're donating the brain to BU. And, I just saw that as it's just a win-win situation as a lawyer. You donate the brain, and if it comes back positive, then CTE, is what killed Aaron Hernandez or drove him to kill. If it comes back negative, at least you donated the brain. And, it went to good.
Yeah.
Right. Optics-wise, win-win.
Win-win.
Then it comes out that he had CTE, and he was the youngest, the worst case for someone his age, and, you take that into account. And then it's kind of worst case scenario for the NFL. You had a CTE problem, and you had an Aaron Hernandez problem.
Yeah.
/ NFL crime problem.
Mm-hmm.
And now doctors are, linking him to, or diagnosing him with CTE posthumously, and you already know that he was convicted of killing someone. So then you've got a lot of parents and people worried about head trauma as is, and repeated blows to the head. And now you kind of morph those two. That's a huge problem in terms of perception for the NFL. So Aaron Hernandez, goes down now as a CTE case. And, then you start talking to people from his past, like how many concussions did he have? And, he had X amount of concussions diagnosed, say, in the NFL or with the University of Florida. And, just when you think that you've reached the end of the line, on reporting, there's just more. And you talk to people from the childhood and, people who have, literally suited up against him in Pop Warner, and guys who, played against him. And, so we have strong voices just kind of shedding light on, his path as a football player. And you also just juxtapose that with Odin Lloyd, one of the victims, who was playing semi-professional football, which essentially means that you pay to suit up. You're not getting paid. Playing for the Boston Bandits. There's no there's certainly no 5-year, $40 million check.
Right.
And Odin Lloyd's a big boy. He could, hit them, linebacker, whatever position. And, we talked to some of his teammates, and they talked about, that life, that, that street life versus that football life. And, Hernandez was trying to clearly double, or
live in both worlds.
Live in both worlds. Yeah. And, some of the, Lloyd's friends are saying you can't do that. And if you're at an actual, on the street level, you recognize that. Hernandez was, a chameleon to a lot of people. I talked to Nelson, the former Jet receiver, David Nelson, who played with him at Florida.
Yeah.
He dubbed him a chameleon in terms of just how he could go, kind of, be with Robert Kraft one day and then, picking up Odin Lloyd down on Faison Street in Dorchester the next. And it was that kind of, double life and concealing things that clearly Hernandez was trying to pull off.
Yeah.
And he just got in too deep on multiple levels.
And very quickly. That's the other thing, because you talk about how he
3 years in the NFL.
3 years in the NFL.
A Super Bowl, all these things. Won a national championship with Tebow at Florida.
And Percy Harvin. who was very problematic.
Urban Meyer,
as well.
Bill Belichick,
and everything just changed. When you look at this project, what do you, if somebody comes to see us, comes to the premiere, we're going to do that. What do you hope they take away from this? Because it's a lot of things that sometimes is when I look at documentaries, the ones that are really good, are the ones that kind of take people into a place or a thing about people that they maybe didn't get to know. Is that what you hope is served? Like, what's the goal? When you look, you've obviously seen this, runs 87 minutes.
Yeah. And you're covering new ground on this story that other people, while they've covered it, probably haven't visited where you've gotten to.
And that's another thing, Kevin, right? Because a lot of people don't know things post the suicide and the end of the double murder trial.
Yeah.
And now there's still more to the story that I think a lot of people still have been wanting to know, which is I think why it's so intriguing. But again, what do you hope people, hey, come see this, you watch this documentary, what do you want them to take away from this?
Yeah, I want to take you to Faison Street. I want to take you to Bristol, Connecticut. I want you to see Lake Avenue, where Hernandez, grew up, and Greystone Avenue, where, his family life. And I want you to be exposed to kind of a panoramic view of what happened here. Aaron Hernandez was on this earth for 27 years. He had a tattoo that said "My Perfect World." He had a godson named Jano.
I was wondering where the title came from, actually.
You can see Jano is tattooed there right on his pec.
Yeah.
And, he was, to a lot of people, his perfect world was everything that he had.
Yeah.
And you keep on digging, and you find the roots of, what led to his downfall. And, he lost his father when he was just between leaving Connecticut, where he was an All-American, and going down to Florida. And, he really checked a lot of the boxes in terms of what people would hold up as major accomplishments. But there were a number of red flags along the way that either people just ignored or decided not to impose discipline on him or keep him on a straighter path. And in the end, I think that's what really cost him a lot. And it cost him his life, and let alone a few families.
We had a great time. Love talking to you about this, especially the documentary. We're so excited to see it and everything here about your career. I think there's a lot that people can take from this. We have to have you back on because I would love to talk to you about the whole clickbait culture. There's a whole other thing we talk about, the clickbait culture in journalism.
We talk about that
fake
a lot.
news and the challenging time that it is for journalists right now
and
to do the right thing.
And glad to know that you've obviously rebounded from the daily
Yes,
news.
we're very happy. We're very happy for you.
I sent you a text around that time to make sure
Absolutely.
stuff was all good. So
always appreciate it.
Yeah. So no, thank you for joining us, man. We really appreciate you having you on. You come back?
Absolutely. When Tim Hardaway is an NBA All-Star, let me know.
That is, for people who don't know, that is a little shot at our camera guy Greg, who thinks Tim Hardaway will be an NBA All-Star. But I'm going to agree with Kevin Armstrong in the fact that I think Tim Hardaway can be an All-Star, probably in the G League.
I hope that he's an All-Star though, because he's on my fantasy team.
Whatever. I'm going to stick with you on that prediction. Kevin, once again, congratulations on the documentary. We look forward. You can see the documentary. The name of it is My Perfect World. It's a documentary on the late Aaron Hernandez. Kevin and Dan Wetzel, as co-produced by Blackfin, will premiere at the DOC NYC Fest on November 14th at the IFC Center. Second show for that premiere will be November 15th at Sinopolis, Chelsea, so you can catch it there. We're excited about it. You heard a lot from Kevin.
Yeah.
Follow him. Does great writing for a bunch of outlets. And he says we'll be back on the Ain't Hard to Sell podcast, so we're happy about that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you again,
pleasure,
Kevin.
guys.
All right, so for Kevin Armstrong and Brian Fonseca and the people who've been joining us here in studio, including Greg, who thinks that Tim Hardaway will make an all-star team. That's it for episode 50 of the Ain't Hard to Sell podcast. Until next time, guys.